All right, welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, this is class 4, and today we are going to be looking at web servers and application servers. All right, we want to understand the differences between these two servers. All right, so when do we use a web server? Where do we use a web server? When and where do we use an application server as well? So we want to look at the similarities, and we're also going to try and look at the differences between them. And then we're also going to be looking at some popular web servers that we know, like Apache HTTP server. And then we're also going to be looking at some application servers, all right, that are available, like JBoss from Oracle. Okay, so let's get into the conversation today. Now, basically, a web server is a specialized software, which means it is actually an application that you run on your system, on a hardware. Okay, so, and a web server basically does three things. It stores, it processes, and then it serves. Right? So basically, if you look at the three things that it does, which means somebody has to put, a code. It can be an HTML code. It can be, a JavaScript code, all right, basically stored on the web server. So what happens is that, when you visit a website, right, you open up your web browser, Mozilla, Microsoft Edge, Chrome, any website, any browser that you're using. Now you open up the browser, which basically is like the client. Now you type in the URL of the website you want to visit. Let's say you want to visit xyz.com, for example. Right now, when you enter the URL, okay, you are sending a request. So it looks something like this. You're right, you have a web browser opened up, and then you are sending a request when you type in that URL, xyz.com, for example. Now, that request, of course, will go through the internet, okay, and then it gets to the web server. Now, the web server looks at your request, okay. If what you are requesting is available, then it sends a response, all right, back to the web browser, and then you can access the content that you have requested for. All right. So basically, a web server is a software, a specialized software, and specialized basically means that it is designed, all right, to do storage, designed to process, and then designed to serve, all right, web content. Right now, we visit quite a number of sites every day, all right? Different websites, Facebook, Instagram, and all of these things. Now, all of those websites, all of those applications that we visit every day, that we use day to day, all right, they reside on a server. So anytime we go to any of the website, all right, or we use any of those applications, what we are basically doing is we are making a request, and then the server will respond back, all right, with what we have requested. Is that all right? So that's basically what a web server, all right, is. Now let's move on. So let's take a look at a web server and an application server. All right. Now, on the other hand, an application server basically extends the capabilities of a web server now by supporting dynamic content generation, application logic, and integration with various resources. Okay? So basically, what that means is that a web server would usually just serve the content that it has stored, all right, on it as is. Which means when you're using a web server to host a website, for example, okay, now that website, if the website is not doing any kind of, maybe people are not doing any kind of registration, or maybe it's not a payment kind of website, all those kind of things. It's just maybe a front end website. People can view your services, all right, they can see what your business is about, all those kind of things, right? Now, what a web server would just do is to serve the static content. So the HTML code, all right, all the menu bars and everything. Now, those things are served by your web server without any kind, all right, of manipulation, which means the web server does not do anything extra on those data, right? It just serves them as is, right? But an application server on the other end, right, supports dynamic content generation. All right, you go to Amazon.com, for example, you want to order a pen. Now, when you click on, all right, on add to cart, and then you want to check out, all right, it generates what you call an order ID, right? So that's dynamic content generation. Now that's some application logic going on behind the scene. Because I mean, the order ID that was generated, all right, it's some form of application logic, some form of programming has gone into play, okay, before you could generate the application, all right, before you could generate the order ID, right? Because I mean, you are on the website trying to order something. Another person is also on the website. There are millions of people on that same website trying to order things, all right, almost at the same time. And then the application is robust enough, all right, to generate different order IDs, all right, for different people in different locations and in different regions, right? Now, a web server cannot undo that much, all right, flexible, how do I put it now? A web server cannot handle, all right, that much logic, all right? It can't handle that much logic. So at best, what your web server can do is to serve static content, okay? So if there are images on the side, it serves the images as they are. All right. But when it comes to some kind of dynamism, right? Content generation, some kind of logic, some integration. Don't forget, by the time you're done with your order, you'll have to make payment, right? It takes you to the payment page. Now, what you are going to pay, something is responsible for computing all of that, data. For example, if you have like 10 things that you want to buy from the Amazon website, right? The system is responsible for calculating everything that you bought, and then it will add the shipping fee, add the tax and everything to it, and then you get your bill, and then you go over to the payment section, right? Now, a web server cannot handle that much logic, right? So that is where your application server comes into the picture. Such if you have a website that requires such kind of heavy processing, all right, then the application server comes into, all right, the picture. Okay, so the application server can also help to integrate, different systems like messaging, like database, and other kind of integration that your application needs. Okay, so for example, you have a client. The client is making an HTTP request, all right, to your application server. Of course, it's going to go over the internet, and then it gets to your application server, and then you have this servlet request. All right, servlet request basically, it's something related to Java. Basically, if you want to do some form processing, you want to do things like database interaction, you want to manage, session and all those kind of things. All right, and then it gets to the database. Perhaps somebody's trying to submit something into the database, or somebody's requesting the data, all right, from the database, right? So it gets there, and then there's a servlet response back to the application server. The application server responds back, all right, to the client. So if you have, not taken anything away from what I've just said, I would like you to just remember this now, that your web server is best when it comes to handling static content, whereas your application server is good, all right, when there are some logic involved, all right, when there are integrations involved, all right, when you have to interact with external systems. Okay, so your application server is good, all right, for such use cases. Okay, now let's take a look at some key differences. Now, one of the difference here is that the web server mostly delivers static content. So when we talk about static content, what do we mean? All right, by static content. Now, static content is content that a server does not need to modify, which means if you have your index.html stored on your web server, now by the time somebody is requesting, all right, for that page, all right, your server does not have to do any kind of modification. It just serves the content as is. That is what static content is, right? So static content means such content do not need any kind of modification. They don't need any kind of processing before it is delivered. For example, if there's a picture on a website, the picture does not have to be resized or reshaped before it is delivered to the person requesting. Or maybe somebody is going to a website and then you want to download an article, all right, from a website, a PDF article from a website. Now that does not need any kind of modification or processing, right? You just download it the way it has been uploaded, and then you have access to it. So that is basically one of the key differences. So web servers deliver mostly static content, all right, mostly static content. On the other hand, your application server mostly delivers dynamic content. So dynamic content here, these are content that changes based on how the user interacts with it, right? So these are what? They are content that change based on the request that the user is making. Okay. For example, if you have a website, all right, or for example, all right, let's use Amazon as an example. Now, of course, you can imagine millions of people, all right, doing, things on Amazon, those who are selling, those who are buying, all right, a lot of transaction going on, all right, on AWS. Okay. Now, it depending on what everybody is doing, right? We cannot have the same parts, for example, right? My own part can have maybe 2 items, all right? Another person's cart can have 3 items, right? In my own part, I may be eligible for some kind of discount, right? In somebody else's cart, all right, that person may not be eligible for any kind of discount. Okay, so what we will see at the end of the day is going to be different based on what we're trying to do on the website. All right, so there is some kind of logic right there. For example, like the example that I gave earlier about you trying to order something. Okay, now when you're ordering something, if I'm trying to check out, my order ID is going to be different. For example, even if you're ordering the same thing, for example, if I'm ordering a pen and you're also ordering a pen, even if we are using the same system to make that order, all right, we're not going to get the same order ID. It's going to be completely different. All right. So that is basically what an application server does, right? So basically, the content changes based on how the users interact. Okay. Based on what? How the users interact. So, for example, you want to do some kind of dynamically generated reports, some customized data representations, personalized UIs, database results, some processed HTML, and all of that. Or for example, if we're trying to get into an application server, for example, and then we're trying to check our results, maybe we just finished an exam. Let's say we took an AWS exam, all right, on the same day, right? Now, if I go into my certification portal and I'm trying to generate my report, all right, and then another person is trying to generate his own report at the same time. Now, what we're going to see is going to be different, right? Because the system is able to generate a report such that it contains our individual data, right? It contains individual data. So even though we may be doing it at the same time, it doesn't mean that my data will appear on another person's report card. Okay, so if I log into my certification portal and then I'm generating my report sheet to see what I scored and all of that, now that report is going to give me what is specific to me based on my request. So I'm going to see my name, I'm going to see my score, all right, the date I took the exam, and all of that. The other person who is also interacting with the same system will also see, all right, something that is specific, all right, to him or her based on what he's trying to do, all right, with the system. So that is basically the key difference between, all right, a web server and an application server. Now, you can actually use the two together, right? For example, you can have a web server, okay, as your front end that people interact with. So maybe your landing page, for example, right? You can host your website, all right? You can host your website using a web server, and then you make that your landing page, right? And then if they're trying to now do something that involves some kind of application logic and all of those kind of things, then they are redirected to your application server, which oftentimes, all right, we call backend. Okay, oftentimes we refer to it as backend. So most times we say, we have front end applications, we have back end application, right? The difference is just that we can say one is a web server, the other is an application server, because the back end, that is where all the logic happens, right? That's where all the processing happens. Okay, when you're trying to generate anything, it happens at the back end, which of course it's more like your application server. But the front end is interactive. People can view whatever you have on the side. But then if there is any report that you want to generate, if there's anything that you're trying to do, then it goes to the back end, and then the back end undoes all of that logic. All right. So I'm sure you're familiar with that terminology of front end and back end. Is that okay? So that's basically what it is. So let's take a look at types of web and application server. Of course, we have different web servers. We have, quite a number of application servers as well. So let's try to take a look at it, all right, the types that we have, and then, provide us with a little explanation, all right, on these things. It's just, this is expected to be just a short lecture, just to introduce us to this thing, because we're going to be, by the time we get into the Linux class, we're going to be installing, all right, the web servers and, do some things with it so that at least, but having the knowledge now is good, so, because it prepares us, for when we're doing the hands-on eventually, right? So let's take a look at the types of web servers that we have. Number one on our list is the Apache HTTP server. It's one of the most popular web servers out there, all right? I mean, if you are using a Linux, Ubuntu or Debian and all of that, all right, and then you want to host a website and all of that, all right, I'm sure you are going to be using Apache HTTP server. Okay, it's and one of the reasons why it's popular is because it's customizable, which means you can modify it. You can have multiple sites, all right, using the Apache web server, which means you can have site A, site B, and each of them will have their own respective domain name and things like that. So it's highly customizable. The next one on our list is the Nginx. All right, now Nginx is lightweight. All right, it's a lightweight web server and it's faster than Apache, all right, web server. Now, one of the things that also makes Nginx to stand out is its ability to do what you call reverse proxy, right? Which means your Nginx can serve as, let's say, a gateway, all right, to your web servers. Which means you can have, all right, your Nginx as more like, if anybody's trying to access your website, it's going to be like the first point of call, and then your Nginx can redirect the traffic to servers that you configure behind the Nginx web server. Okay, so it can act as a reverse proxy, and it does that very well. Now, another thing that makes Nginx very popular is its ability to do what you call load balancing, which means if you have 2, 3, 4, 5, all right, 10 web servers, right, your Nginx, all right, can also serve as a kind of gateway, okay, where if anybody wants to access your servers, they go through the Nginx, and then the Nginx is able to, all right, spread the traffic across the number of servers, all right, that you are connected to it. Okay, and one of the other important use case for Nginx is when it comes to Kubernetes. Now, in Kubernetes, we're going to be talking about what you call ingress controller, all right, which is more like a way to expose your services, all right, to the outside world in Kubernetes. Now, Nginx is used, all right, for that use case, all right, in Kubernetes, and that is one of the reasons why it is very popular, very, all right, used particularly in the Kubernetes world. Okay, so we're going to be looking at that as well. So I've said a few things now. So you have the Apache web server, which is highly customizable. You can have different websites, all right, just using the single Apache web server, and then they each all have their own respective domain names, and then it is highly customizable. Then for Nginx can do reverse proxy, which basically is, you receive the request that is coming, and then you redirect it to the appropriate web server. That is reverse proxy. And then I said Nginx can also help to do load balancing, which means, all right, it can distribute traffic to different web servers, all right, that you configure, all right, to accept traffic from the Nginx web server. And the last one that I mentioned about Nginx is that it can also serve as what you call ingress controller, all right, in Kubernetes, which is more like a way to expose your Kubernetes service to the outside world. Okay, but we're going to get into that when we get into the Kubernetes, all right, class. Now, another web server that we have is the Apache Tomcat. The Apache Tomcat web server is basically used to host Java applications. So if you have any JSP, all right, applications, right, web applications written in Java, you can host them on Apache Tomcat. So it's a web server specifically, all right, for JSP kind of, applications. Okay, so but it's not an application server really. It's still a web server. Okay, but just that it is specific, all right, for JSP kind of Java servlet application or something. Okay. Then the one that we have is the popular IIS, which is the Microsoft Information, server, which is also basically a Windows-based, web server. All right, so that's another one. Now, moving on, let's take a look at application servers. So, what are the types of application servers that we have out there? So, we have the Oracle WebLogic server, very popular in the banking space. All right, most of the bank applications are actually, they actually use the Oracle WebLogic server, as their backend. Okay, because I mean, you can imagine the bank application, a lot of processing is going on. Somebody's making a deposit, somebody's withdrawing, somebody's transferring money, somebody's trying to do a whole lot of transaction, going on. So you need a robust application server to handle, all of that different logic. Okay, because I mean, there's a lot of computation going on, right? If somebody withdraws money from their account, the balance must reflect the true, state of the account and all of those kind of things, right? So you need some, application server to handle all of that heavy logic. Another one is also JBoss. JBoss is also from, I think JBoss is from Red Hat. All right. It's also an application server that is used to host, I think, Java applications. All right. Java EE applications. All right. Which is the Java Enterprise, application kind of. All right. So JBoss is one of the application servers used extensively in organizations. All right. And then, of course, you have the popular SAP, right? I'm sure some of us have heard about SAP before, right? It's also the SAP NetWeaver. It's an application server that you can use to host SAP applications. So there's SAP HANA, a lot of SAP applications. Now, these applications are actually enterprise applications. All right, enterprise applications. Okay, so all of these application server are used for all these enterprise applications, like your ERP, your CRM kind of applications. All right, those are enterprise applications, right? And those kind of applications cannot be hosted on a web server because, I mean, they do a lot of logic, right? A lot of reports are generated on them. All right, a lot of analyses are done. A lot of people are entering different things. So, I mean, if you've used an ERP before, which is an enterprise resource planning application, all right, it's an heavy application that does a lot of things, right? You can use to generate reports, you can use to generate invoices, you can use to generate receipts, you can use to generate, pay slips and a lot of other things, right? So there's a lot of logic that, that happens behind the scene, which obviously your web server cannot handle, all right? So that's why you need all of these, that's why you need all of these application server. Now, let's just do a quick recap here. So, web servers are basically to help with static content, which means content that does not require any kind of modification or processing, right? Now, application server on the other hand, all right, are used to handle content that are dynamic, which means content that requires some modifications, content that will change, right? If a user requests for something, all right, some kind of processing must happen, all right, in order for the user to get, all right, actually what they requested for. Okay, so for example, like the example that I gave earlier about if you want to generate your report, all right, your result report on AWS, for example, you just took an AWS certification and then you want to generate your result report. All right. Now the system is going to do some kind of logic there because I mean the report must show your name, it must display your score, it must show the time you took the exam and all of that, and then of course the name of the exam that you took. So that's some kind of business logic, all right there. So which the application server obviously knows how to handle that, all right, better. Okay. And I said earlier, I said, your web server can also be seen as like a front end kind of a thing. And then the application server can be seen like the back end. Okay. So the back end handles all the logic. The front end happens, all right, handles, basically static content like images, PDFs, all right, videos and stuff like that. So things that do not require, all right, any kind of processing or modification. Okay. So thank you so much. All right. So thank you so much, guys, for sticking to the end of today's video. We hope you were able to gain some insight, all right, into what we discussed in the video today. All right. We hope to see you in the next video, and we want to appeal to you once again. If you're yet to subscribe, please hit the subscribe button, like this video, share it to as many people that you know that will benefit from, all right, these sessions. Okay, so thank you so much, all right, and we hope to see you in the next video. Bye for now.